Sanji, the two wings of the future pirate king Straw Hat Luffy. From the outside, the two look like the Straw Hat's resident rowdy crew members. Every pirate ship has brawls that break out, and Zoro and Sanji fill that role for the Straw Hats. They don't get along in the slightest, and they seem a petty disagreement away from killing each other. This grudge didn't start with their first interaction in chapter 45, Before the Storm, where Zoro appears unfazed by Sanji's charisma and did not seek conflict right off the bat, although Usopp had none of Sanji's blatant discrimination. Their first direct interaction is 4 chapters later, titled Storm. Here, Sanji directly calls Zoro an idiot for rushing to his death in the Grand Line. Zoro even took this slight in stride and responded with his resolve. Sanji, however, couldn't come to terms with the idea of somebody throwing their life away for the sake of their ambitions. Of course, this is before Sanji even recognized him as the notorious pirate Roronoa Zoro. However, this did not change Sanji's worldview, as during Zoro's clash with Mihawk, he still couldn't come to terms with the idea or even empathize with Zoro's actions then. In remembering his first, but actually second, tragic backstory in chapter 58 titled Damn Geezer, Zeph attempted to save Sanji's life for no other reason than Sanji's dream. Something lost in translation to Sanji, as he believes the only way to repay Zeph is with his own life. Sanji values dreams. However, as an adult, fighting for himself was never his driving factor. He'd even go against his own nature and be willing to die for a loved one. Perhaps it's not risking one's life that Sanji rejects. Perhaps it's the idea of cutting off worldly attachments. To Sanji, dying for one's own personal goal is stupid. However, dying for a loved one, or just a pretty face, is noble. Zoro's dream is internal. It won't be accomplished until he himself acknowledges that he is the very best. Sanji's goal is external. It won't be accomplished until he sees and locates the All Blue, literally part of the world. Even in risking his life for Zeph, it's not for Zeph. It's for Zeph's restaurant. As a twisted mirror, Jin repays Sanji's kindness by sparing him, knowing full well this will result in his death by the hands of Krieg. An action Sanji fails to relate to or understand. Jin sees himself as a failure who deserves death. Is that self-talk, Jin? Let's start with that. Sanji responds to Jin's eventual sacrifice, stating that Jin's only flaw was simply following the wrong man. As the battle progresses, Zeph takes the time to explain to Sanji exactly what it is Luffy, and by proxy Zoro, is all about. They are the scariest type, the type that will fight to the death for their goal. They have that Mamba mentality. They have what Sanji lacks, and questioned in Zoro this whole arc. Conviction. This alone is what allows Zoro and Luffy to sever their worldly connections. In the battle's conclusion, Jin egressed, stating that essentially, because he did not hold strong convictions of his own, he inherited Krieg's dogma without realizing. Another cautionary tale for Sanji. For Jin, it was an escape. For Sanji, it was safety. It was protecting his worldly values, his treasure. Only until he realized he could not hide his true conviction from his co-workers, and that he wasn't fooling anyone. Finally, he set sail with Luffy. When did this become a Sanji character dissection? I swear, he's just a naturally more complex character than a Zoro or whatever the hell Luffy is. Their first physical conflict started in chapter 76, titled I'm Going to Sleep, where Zoro recognizes the mess Nami found herself in dealing with Arlong. With Luffy, Sanji, and Yosaku arriving on the island, they are met with grim news, followed by Nami arriving and acting coldly towards the crew. Sanji is Sanji and is promptly scolded by Zoro for not understanding the situation in its entirety, with Sanji responding with his understanding of love being a hurricane. Zoro questions Nami about Usopp. Upset at her response, he lunges forward to attack, naturally getting interrupted by Sanji. It seems Sanji cannot stand by as a woman is harmed. Zoro restates that Sanji doesn't understand the situation. Sanji acknowledges Zoro's irritable response and chalks it up to shame for losing to Mihawk previously, which strikes a nerve in Zoro. Luffy decides to sleep this excitement off, as Zoro and Sanji speculate about Nami, where Sanji misconstrues Zoro's words as meaning something else and lashes out at Zoro, with Zoro defending calmly against Sanji's attack. Is this the start of a pattern? Secretly, though, Sanji wonders if something's up with the wounds Zoro received from Mihawk. The two only seem to be on the same page when it's about clearing the way for the force of nature that is Luffy's neurodivergence. During the fight with Arlong, Luffy is thrown into the water to drown. Sanji dives in after him without a second thought, playing into the fishman's trap. Zoro comments on the rashness in Sanji's actions, and the two agree to defeat the fishman before retrieving Luffy. Zoro succumbs to his wounds, distracting Sanji enough to get knocked down. Zoro, however, pulls himself back up through sheer force of will and delivers a sicko mode foreshadowing against the octopus Hachi. Despite his wounds, and unwilling to wait for Sanji to finish his fight, Zoro is about to dive in to save Luffy. Sanji opts to dive in first instead, despite resulting in having to fight a fishman in water. Zoro calls this out as stupid. With mid-difficulty, Sanji resurfaces, reporting that Luffy is being taken care of. Sanji defeats his enemy, leaving only Arlong left, who then proceeds to punish them both with a single attack. Luffy recovers, but must be assisted to return to the battlefield. So, Zoro suggests to buy Sanji 30 seconds to do so, which he ultimately does. After the battle, during the after party, the two are seen hanging out together. However, this is short-lived, as Sanji runs off to flirt with women, and Zoro takes another nap. During the battle, it's easy to want to compare the two, but Zoro had to fight at critical health, and Sanji ended up fighting more opponents, and even defeated a fishman underwater. Even with these addendums, the two felt as if they pulled equal weight and had to commit to equally as difficult tasks, maybe giving the edge to Zoro. Their departure in chapter 95, titled Spinning Windmill, Nami sprints to leave her island, however not without pickpocketing everyone whose path she crosses. In response, Zoro questions Nami's loyalty to the crew, while Sanji gives the whole thing a thumbs up, like the simp he is. In response to Sanji's overprotection of Nami, Zoro calls him out as being a tool. In Log Town, the two agree on taking down the execution platform, trapping Luffy, in order to save him. And they both regretted their weakness in the situation, as they both were unable to reach Luffy in time. However, due to what seemed like divine intervention, Luffy was saved, prompting Sanji to ask Zoro if he believes in God. Zoro does not. During their escape, they encounter an aggro Tashigi, prompting Sanji to assume the worst in Zoro. Zoro ignores Sanji's insults as he engages Tashigi, but declines cutting her down, not out of gender-based chivalry, but because she resembles Zoro's childhood friend, Koina. On their way to the Grand Line, the two agree to paddle their way out of the calm belt. Later on, they speculate about the possibility of ships climbing mountains. Sanji admits to knowing a bit about it, however, changes the subject to exactly how incredibly dangerous the Grand Line is supposed to be. Entering the Grand Line, they meet an immovable object in Laboon, in which they both work together with Usopp to steer the ship astray, to little effect. They are both shocked and horrified at the idea of Luffy shooting Mary's cannon at the whale, possibly angering the giant. They are mortified at Luffy then proceeding to punch the whale in the eye. Following getting swallowed by Laboon, the two speculate as to why the insides look the way it does. Whether or not this is a dream, or whether or not whatever is inside of Laboon is even human. That's when they meet Crocus. Sanji, intimidated, picks a fight with the man, but just ends up getting angered instead. Zoro tries to calm Sanji down and attempts to speak to Crocus next. However, he is instantly angered by Crocus's eccentricities as well. They both agree to leave the whale's stomach before getting dissolved. Then, something interesting happens to Sanji. They are attacked indirectly by Mr. Nine and Miss Wednesday. However, they are quickly dispatched by Luffy, tied up, and then thrown out overboard, all on Sanji's watch. And all he has to say for it is, "Bye-bye, babe." Even if this may seem harsh, as strong and as immature as the character that Sanji is, in these ways he may lack conviction. And as a result, he stayed on the sidelines while a literal princess was being manhandled by his captain. I understand this for the sake of plot and pacing, but that never really stopped Sanji before. It was always simply a matter of principle. Crocus proceeds to explain to the crew that Laboon was abandoned long ago by a crew who fled the Grand Line out of fear. Sanji responds by calling the crew cowards for running away for the sake of their lives. A bit of projection on Sanji's part. Zoro just stares and says nothing. Sanji has been noticeably cold very recently. And I may very well be reading too far into the scene, but that's what we're here to do, so here we go. I think what Sanji allowed Luffy and the crew to do really pissed him off. It didn't just go against his standards, but his promise to Zeph. And now he's following a man who's willing to hurt a woman, which is the last thing he would ever want to be a part of. Which is exactly what he said in Fishman Island. I think this may have been an intentional internal conflict for Sanji. Although, as of writing this, I can't really see it going anywhere. So again, maybe I'm reading too much into it. I don't know. Zoro and Sanji watch Luffy climb up top Laboon. Zoro is frustrated, while Sanji infers that perhaps he just likes climbing things. They both identify that Luffy is in fact carrying the mask of the Mary and proceeds to stab Laboon with it. They are not shocked in the slightest of Luffy's actions. However, they get frustrated once they finally take in all that's happened. I just want to bookend my Sanji speculations by adding that Sanji responds to the promise to Laboon being broken with, "If the promise is broken, then everything is best left alone." Also, he kicks Luffy for eating Nami's portion of food, resulting in a broken log pose, ending in his punishment by the hands of Nami. He was not rewarded for his hesitation and lack of conviction, things Zeph warned him about. Crew set sail and brave a mighty storm, all while Zoro was sleeping. In a funny scene, Zoro wakes up at the end of it all and judges the crew's exhaustion as laziness. Hearing this, everyone exhausted curses Zoro out in their heads. Sanji serves the crew drinks, including Zoro. Alright, let's recap. So far, the two are depicted to be in equal power, but for different reasons. Zoro, in a sense, was Luffy's first mate, if you don't count Kobe, and why would you? However, Sanji provides Luffy with delicious meats. Sanji tends to rush into conflict blindly, while Zoro often tries for a more measured response. Sanji so far lacks proper conviction, unlike Zoro, proving that despite his smoking and womanizing, Sanji still isn't an adult quite yet. Zoro may be hot-headed, however he is in no way lacking, proven by his relative lack of character development in the story so far. The two get along most when it's agreeing on Luffy being an idiot, or during life-threatening scenarios. They fight whenever it's a woman involved, and it's almost always antagonized by Sanji.
Finally, their rivalry starts proper in chapter 115, titled Adventures in Little Garden.
It's here that again shenanigans ensue. But before all that, Sanji asks Zoro for a favor. For the first time ever, he tasks Zoro with bringing back meat. Zoro obliges. However, he replies in a matter-of-fact tone that he will bring back a beast that even Sanji himself could not kill, insulting the chef, prompting Sanji to challenge Zoro to a hunting contest that, needless to say, never gets properly settled. The two have been bickering ever since. That's what started it. Perceived power scaling. I've heard from other One Piece dissections that this somewhat violent reaction from Sanji's behalf stems from an underlying need not to be a burden to Zoro or to the crew as a whole, which I think tracks when you consider the future arcs centered around Sanji. But I'll explain soon that that couldn't be further from the case. Sanji being a burden. Yes, and ever since their hunting competition, their perceived power levels have stayed stagnant, equal to one another while constantly rising, at least in perception. But is that fair? Zoro is more mature, spiritually. He can separate his personal feelings from what needs to be done. Just look at how he begged Mihawk to train him. Hold that thought. Because ever since Zoro's perceived loss, failure at Little Garden, he'd gotten serious about his training. Deadly serious. And he never stopped. Because Zoro is also insecure. Perhaps rightfully so. The world is dangerous, has a lot of strong guys out there. As the sword of the ship, Zoro might not be strong enough, sharp enough. So he tempers himself every day. It's not like Goku, where he just trains to see just how strong he can get and surpass his limits. Just like Sanji with just about everything deep down, this is completely induced by anxiety. Except Sanji doesn't train. Well, sure, he trained during the time skip, but his main concerns are cooking and females. I personally think that both Haki, Armament Haki, and the Diablo Jambe, which may be the same thing, I'm not completely certain at the moment, but I believe that he may have had both those capabilities from the jump, since they picked him up. But that may just be conjecture. Zoro, on the other hand, fights with 3 swords. That's 2 swords more of an advantage than you would with just 1 against an unarmed opponent. This advantage even gives him an arguable advantage over Luffy. However, Sanji, for all intents and purposes, can also use a blade, and quite efficiently. However, he would never do so unless it's for cooking. He uses a lot of handicaps for himself, which is a bit of a trend. Between not using blades, even though it make him stronger in battle, not using his hands, even though it make him stronger in battle, not hitting women, not utilizing his raid suit he gets later on. I mean, high heaven, the man's even a chain smoker. Sanji is a man of principles. it guides him through life. And considering that both me and Zeph have berated Sanji in the beginning of this video because he couldn't stick to his convictions like Zoro and Luffy could, I'd be hard-pressed to call it a detriment on his part for him not willing to do this simply because he doesn't want to. However, just sit back and think for a second of exactly how far above Zoro Sanji would be if he simply put all his skill points into fighting. Incidentally, just like Zoro. All throughout the pre-time skip, Zoro grabbed at every chance he got to train his body and get stronger, while Sanji actively handicapped himself, even if it meant life or death. During the 2-year period to train, Zoro trained with the greatest swordsman in the world, just straight up. The man's a demon, and he trained with that demon for 2 years. He got to use Mihawk's home gym for 2 years. What did Sanji do? Well, he jogged. He just jogged. It's light work. That's 1/3 of Saitama's daily regimen. But they're equals. And yeah, Sanji kicked a lot of alphabet, but that's what he's supposed to do. And Zoro fought animals in the anime, so it barely counts as minimum training. However, as a result, Sanji literally found out that the sky was literally his limit. And they're depicted as equal today. Equal wings of the Pirate King. Perfectly symmetrical, perfectly equal. At least that's how Oda likes to depict it. And it's crazy about his overcorrecting with it because he has the general fan base earnestly think Sanji is weaker because he's always fighting the third strongest fighter in the opposing pirate crew. But that's just fate. The same as this is Zoro's fate. You see, Zoro equals hard work. Sanji equals talent. Sanji was a royal attempt at eugenics. And sure, he was technically a failure, but come on, he got something. And it's even bubbling up again now. It's crazy because it happened in a pretty recent arc in Wano where it was revealed that Sanji was in fact, or perhaps it's still conjecture at this point, he may be Lunarian, part of a god race. Probably, a parallel to the Divas in comparison or in opposition to Zoro's Ashura. You see, Ashuras are typically conquerors of physical land here on Earth, and maybe even parts of Hell. However, the Divas alone rule the space in heaven, and they would knock down any Ashura who attempts to climb up to heaven and conquer it. It wasn't their place, try as they might. The Ashura used to live in heaven alongside the Divas, but were kicked out for drinking too much. Sound familiar? So there you have it. I took the longest tour to tell you about my 2 favorite Straw Hats. I hope you enjoyed it in the background of some task or pastime. Hopefully I can get the audio right. Not like last time. Not like last time. Enjoy your next video. Sleep is for the weak.